As Adam was saying earlier, I've had this slight parallel hobby, if you like, career of writing a weekly article about the subject in first the Sunday Telegraph, then the FT, and more recently the Sunday Times. And so I do think a lot about all the thrills and spills and opportunities and threats of being self-employed and so forth. And so I have generated a list of what I call my 15 entrepreneur maxims, which I will read to you now. So maxim number 1 is that I think the most important motivating force for entrepreneurs is a desire for autonomy, not money. First and foremost, entrepreneurs want independence and freedom. They want to be free of the bureaucracy and office politics, which I think so frequently plagues larger organisations, and they want to control their own destiny and to get the credits for their efforts. Maxim number 2, I think a sense of optimism is a precursor to being an entrepreneur. I think cynics and pessimists simply don't succeed. You've got to believe in the possibility, as Churchill said, of the sunlit uplands ahead. And risk takers desire gain more than they fear loss. And they're the opposite of the majority of the population who never want to lose what they've already got. And that generally speaking, the more entrepreneurs there are, the better off we all are, because although competition is tough, that's what drives improvements and higher quality and a richer society. And what you get in a communist society, for example, is a monopoly which leads to stagnation, incompetence and corruption. Maxim number 4, I've always worked personally with business partners. Now there are some entrepreneurs like Alan Sugar or Philip Green who tend to do it by themselves, but I've always teamed up with others. I think it spreads the responsibilities and it makes the journey more enjoyable. And obviously you look for someone whose skills complement yours, and I think it certainly makes the bad times better and it makes the good times less selfish. Maxim number 5, I believe very much in the concept of domain knowledge. What that means is that I always prefer to work with entrepreneurs, managers and such like, who really do have strong understanding and experience of their particular industry. I don't buy the idea of general managers. I think specialist technical competence and connections and reputation in a particular field matter. Maxim number 6, I think that patient money tends to achieve the best results. I don't really accept the concept of momentum trading or the idea of overnight success. I remember being pretty taken aback when I chaired the Channel 4 pension fund while I was chairman of the main company 6 years. We used to have asset managers come and pitch to manage our money, and you would get these hedge funds come in and they would talk about their typical holding period being a few months. As far as I'm concerned, that's not really investment. I think that's gambling. I think genuine companies take years to build. I think typically it's 5 to 10 years. And that's certainly been my experience over 25 years building companies across different sectors, that you've got to nurture things gradually over the longer run. Maxim number 7, I think the single most important influence on entrepreneurship are role models, not any form of academic study. I think it really matters, for example, role models in home when you're growing up. I think role models in society in general matter a lot. I think entrepreneurship, in terms of stimulating it, is much more about culture than formal education of any kind. Maxim number 8, I like obsessives. I much prefer individuals who are something of workaholics and fail to get their work-life balance right than those who are a dilettante. I've met a lot of high-achieving entrepreneurs over the years, and almost all of them possess, to an extent at least, a one-track mind. Obviously you need talent, you need ambition, but you need industry as much as anything. And I never expect entrepreneurs to be sort of Renaissance men or women. I think in business, exceptional performance very rarely emanates from what I would call the fully rounded personality. Maxim number 9, execution matters vastly more than theory in business. I think all of you, I'm sure, could write a great business plan, but not everyone can carry it out. And that's why I think strategists are ultimately much less valuable than those with a hands-on ability to get business done. And it's surprising how, I've often backed businesses being promoted by very slick talkers, great at presenting, but actually, surprisingly little substance behind all the slick talk. It's all about follow through and action, not the promises. And that's why track records really do matter a hell of a lot more than PowerPoint. Maxim number 10, stating the obvious, entrepreneurs work hard. It's simply not the right career for someone who wants to get rich quick. I think they'd do much better to work in the city. I made, various trade-offs when I was growing up, and I don't regret it, but I think if I had not, I probably wouldn't have had much success. And I'm sometimes taken aback by young would-be entrepreneurs who are simply not prepared to put in the hours and are much more interested in very quick material rewards rather than the actual graft of making a business work, customers, product, service, etc. Maxim number 11, all my returns from investing in private businesses over the decades have come from the big winners. I've had lots of flops, I described a few earlier, made lots of mistakes, but actually they're not significant in the grand scheme of things. And the essential and obvious fact to remember, a bit like zero sum, is that in equity investment you can only lose your stake, assuming you haven't been foolish enough or ill-advised enough to give a personal guarantee. But your upside is in theory unlimited. And if you have a spectacular hit, then you can multiply your stake 10, 20, 100, 1,000 times. Obviously your downside is limited to your stake. Maxim number 12, the most impressive firms that I've ever worked with or seen in action have, generally speaking, adopted, even if they don't use the phrase, a philosophy of Kaizen. My interpretation of this management method is a policy of endless small improvements, many of them initiated from the bottom up. Lots of small details adding up over time to a better business and combined to an openness to incremental change. And really, businesses that succeed in the long run almost always evolve. And certainly those that are good at innovation have that at their core. Maxim number 13, human nature tends to shine the spotlight in any organization on one man or woman, be it, a Steve Jobs or a Mark Zuckerberg or whoever. But actually, most of the finest businesses that I've ever invested in or worked with are constructed by teams, not individuals. So for example, at Pizza Express, when we grew it from 12 to 200 branches through the 90s, we had very much a collegiate group of us. All top 8 of us had shareholdings and separate roles, and I think it was, very much a joint affair, if you like. I think this whole cult of having single genius bosses is extremely unhealthy. I think it's both inaccurate. I think it contributes to a more divided system. I think it leads to excesses like employee CEOs of major corporations being paid 200 or even 500 times as much as the average employee for simply being an employee themselves. I think that's bad for capitalism. I also think it actually fails to deliver for shareholders in terms of value and returns. Maxim number 14, I think philanthropy and volunteering, as soon as one has the energy and can possibly afford it, should be part of the mix. I've been lucky enough so that for the last 15 years or so, I've spent roughly 1 to 2 days a week on various different good causes. I spent 6 years with Channel 4. I've chaired an organisation called the Institute of Cancer Research for the last 2 years. And I've been on the board or trustee or whatever of a number of educational and arts charities. A lot of entrepreneurs actually like starting their own. That's great too, a social enterprise or whatever. But I think all of these non-profit involvements act as a nice complement to the for-profit striving of the day job. And I think one of the great advantages is that they broaden one's horizons and you learn from them and discover new worlds, which in itself I think is, worthwhile thing to do. And then finally, maxim number 15, entrepreneurs really do matter. They create a majority of the private sector, new private sector jobs. So of the 2 million jobs created in the last 5 years in the private sector, the vast majority have come from small, medium-sized companies, not big companies. For example, Microsoft, one of the most profitable companies in the world, in its day, hugely dynamic, laid off 15% of its workforce last year. Entrepreneurs also punch above their weight in terms of innovation, and generally speaking, they're not in the position to play some of the corporate tax games that very big companies do. So in economic and in societal terms, entrepreneurs are incredibly important.